Hi there, hope you're doing well. In today's presentation, we're going to be using data from the 2023-24 Premier League season to create a starting 11 for players which are good value for money. Let's give an overview of the purpose of the project. So imagine this, you're building your fantasy football league for the 2024-25 season and you're deciding which players to pick. You'll pick some of the more top players such as Van Dijk and Rodri, but they cost quite a lot of money. And what you find is your budget becomes smaller and smaller over time. Eventually, you're left with a very limited budget and so a limited pool of players that you can choose from. But you're not really sure who to pick. They're not as really well known. The purpose of today's project is to develop a worksheet which can allow for users to efficiently find players based on criteria such as position, club, and salary, and then based on this limited budget or set of criteria, we can determine who the best players are for your club, your team, so that you can develop the best football fantasy league for the next Premier League season. Let's go over how we're going to do this. So we've got to have key data about the players. We need to store the data in a database in a local MySQL server. We need to then connect this database to an Excel worksheet. We need to create code to query that worksheet. And then we need to make a UI which will allow the user to interact with the data in the database and be presented certain information. And then with that information, we can then choose which players are good value for money and then make a top 11, a top team of players who are good value for money for the next season. Data sources. We used primarily fbref.com. You can see here, this is an example of some of the information that was stored on that website. A benefit of this website, there's lots and lots of player data, but a drawback, it's quite difficult to navigate. You can see just in this example, we've got a table that's got at least 10 columns. That's quite a lot of information, and maybe the user doesn't have to have all that information at once. If we can break this down into different questions, then the user can be presented with less information, but it'll be easier to read. And also we want to add the ability to filter. So can I filter by team? Can I filter by salary? I want to add all of those aspects in because that will allow me to limit my pool of available players based on my budget, based on my specifications. Some of the salary information had to be taken from another source, spotrack.com. Once we then combined all this information together, we then stored it in a MySQL database. Within the MySQL database, we used a number of tables, with each table containing a certain amount of information. Player details, for example, held information about their name, their age, etc., versus passing stats, as it would suggest, is all about how many long passes do they do, medium passes, switches, crosses, etc. This was all of the tables that we used. For example, defensive stats would be things like heading and tackling, whereas offensive stats would be like things like goals and assists. We then used an ID for each player to uniquely identify them, and we would link tables together via this ID. So for example, I know that Max Aarons has an ID of 1, so therefore if I'm looking at the player with an ID of 1, I know that Max Aarons has completed 220 short passes. We used a number of SQL queries to query the database. So we took the information from websites, stored them in a database, and now we're going to use SQL queries to get out certain information from that database. We use join clauses with the IDs in order to combine data from multiple tables at the same time. The benefit of doing this is that we only got the information that we needed based on what the user wanted. So if the user wanted how many goals has someone scored, we only got that information. How many assists they have, we only got that information. Rather than on the website where a lot of information was stored on one table, we were dynamically creating new tables via this join clause. The SQL query can be considered to be dynamic because it's being adjusted at runtime based on the user specification. So if we want all players between 18 and 25 who are from England who earn less than 80 grand a week, the user can specify all of this at runtime. It's not pre-made, hence the query being dynamic. This is an example of some of the code we used, such as here's me selecting the player name and the position. Here's getting the goals from another table. Here's both tables being joined together. And also here's an example of a filter we used, such as the age of the player, which was determined by the user during runtime. Here's an overview of the user interface. First part is what questions being answered. Is it interceptions? Is it goalkeeper plus minus rating? Is it number of assists? Next part is what position does the player play? Another one is how many results do you want to be shown? Do you want the top 5 players, top 10, top 20? What team did they play for? What nation did they belong to? What's their age? And also, what's their weekly salary? Obviously, you might want the best players in the world, but if you have a limited budget, it's really great if you can specify it and you can get the best players for your budget. And you just click update and it will automatically update both a table and a graph for you based on your specifications. Here's an example here. So we've got aerial duels between defenders and midfielders, the top 10 between 27 and 31, and they can't be on more than 100 grand a week. And we can see here James Tarkowski ranks the top both in terms of duels won, and he's doing really well on the success rate as well. And we can see here we use some SQL code to dynamically generate this table based on user specifications. Also, with the same query, we were able to generate a graph of the top 5. So again, James Tarkowski, the same information, just presented in a visual format, making it slightly easier again to read. And again, we used SQL code to dynamically generate these graphs. Now we're going to have a demo of the worksheet in action. So looking here, this particular question is about the conversion rate. We're going to limit it to only 10 results. And we can see here we've got some prolific goal scorers like Erling Haaland, Cole Palmer. We can also filter just by the club. So who were the top goal scorers in Arsenal? Who were the best goal scorers in Arsenal who are also English? And we can get even more specific each time. Again, the stats on the table, the graph gets updated each time based on the user's query. What we will do now, we'll look at a different question. So rather than that, we're going to look at who's completed the most long passes in the Premier League this season for 2023-24. And we can see it's Jordan Pickford who's completed the most. Again, the graph being updated as well. You can see here that a lot of these goalkeepers. So I don't really want to include goalkeepers for this. So let me just include midfielders and forwards. If I press update, all gets updated automatically, both the table and the graph. I can also use a number of other filters. So switches, I can do largest to smallest. Who's got the most switches this season? Looks like it's Rodri. Rodri is on quite a high salary. I might not be able to afford him. And so I need to place some limits. Whilst we're here, another limit I can place is on the age. So maybe I want people who are 26 and below. But this would be a main one. What's the budget I have? I can only spend up to 100,000. Okay, who's the best long passers with that budget? Okay, I can see here a few options. Who's got the best passing success rate? Okay, well, I can see Sander Berge has good pass success rate and completed a lot of passes as well. These stats combined mean that he would be a really good option for completing long passes if that's something that's important to me for a limited budget. After using this worksheet, we are able to generate a starting 11 of players who are really good value for money. So let's go into that in more detail. Starting off in goal, it's Jose Sarr. He had the number 1 ranked goalkeeper plus minus rate per 90 minutes. He also saved more crosses than anyone else in the league, and he was 5th in saves. A really great shot stopper. At left wing back, we've got Anthony Robinson. Led the league in interceptions, 2nd amongst defenders for progressive dribbles, and 5th in dribblers tackled. By being great at progressive dribbles, he could be an offensive threat, but by having great interceptions and dribbles tackled, he could also be great defensively as well. Left centre-back, we've got Jared Branthwaite. He's really good at tackling people. He's got a success rate of 72.58, which is 3rd in the league. Interceptions, he's got 50, which is 7th. And shots, blocks and clearances, did 199, 5th in the league. Also 6'5", big, intimidating presence to get the ball out of the box, combined with his other centre-backs, should be quite difficult for attackers to get open and stay in the box. Max Kilman, captain of Watford, going to be captain of our team as well. 4th in clearances, 4th in shot blocks, and again, another big, intimidating presence to make it difficult for attackers to get in the box and get shots off. Also at centre-back on the right is Mickey van der Ven, fastest player in the Premier League, 37.38 kilometres an hour. No one's recorded a faster time this season. He's also got a good success rate at tackling dribblers. He's also got a decent ability to dribble past people. So 35% of the time, he actually dribbles past defenders, which is pretty good as well. Again, adding both an offensive and defensive threat. Right wing back, we've got Tyreek Mitchell. He came second in terms of tackles in the defensive third and also second in terms of passes blocked. It's going to be really great at getting those tackles in, getting those blocks in, really creating a solid defense in addition to the other defenders. Now moving on to midfield, we've got Pascal Gross. He's did so well this season in terms of passing. He led in crosses, and he also was second in terms of key passes, and he was joint third in terms of assists. He's going to be the person finding everyone else on the pitch. Ross Barkley had a really good season as well. He is second in the league at being able to dribble past defenders in terms of success rate. He also completed 66 dribbles past the defender, which is sixth in the league, and he's pretty decent as well at passing the ball with 163 progressive passes, which is 19th in the league. He's going to be our man who's taking on defenders, creating space for the rest of the team. In at left wing, we've got Anthony Gordon. He got 11 goals this season, 10 assists, someone who can do both scoring and assisting on the offensive end, and also a great dribble of the ball, 138 progressive dribbles. Again, going to put fear into defenders, going to get by them, going to set himself up for goal as well as set up other people. Right wing, Jeremy Doku. He was number one by far in progressive dribbles with over 200 progressive dribbles this season. Also ranked second in terms of dribbles past defenders and had also had 8 assists this season. Again, going to be really good at getting past defenders and creating chances for his teammates. And finally, finishing starting 11 is going to be Jean-Philippe Mateta. He had the number one shot to goal rate at 36.36% of the time. That means when he took a shot, over 36% of the time, it was ending up in the back of the net. He also scored every penalty that he was given this season, which I believe was 2. And he also scored 16 goals this season, which is in the top 10. He's an extremely clinical finisher, and with those wingers supplying him loads of opportunities, I'm sure he'll take advantage of that. Also, we need a manager, of course, and so we got Andoni Iraola. He's only on 20 grand a week, despite winning Manager of the Month in March and having Bournemouth finish 12th in the league. He's the lowest paid manager in the Premier League, so of course for this squad of good value players, he's going to be our manager. Let's have a quick recap of starting 11. So we've got 1 goalkeeper, obviously, 3 central defenders, 2 wing backs, 2 centre mids, 2 wingers, and a striker. Again, we've got the passing threat of Gross, we've got the dribbling ability of Barkley, as well as Doku, as well as Gordon. We've got the clinical finishing of Jean-Philippe. We've got the defensive presence of Kilman. We've got the goalkeeping ability of Jose Sarr. And altogether, this creates a really solid team. And Iraola will be managing this team, hopefully, to victory. So we said all these players are really good value for money. Let's have a look at the total spend. Pascal Gross cost the most money of 65 grand, with Ross Barkley, his centre mid's counterpart, costing the least of 30 grand a week. In total, it cost 540 grand for the starting 11 and the manager. That may appear like an extremely large amount of money, but let's compare it to another team. So this is in comparison to Man United's starting 11, who I believe finished 8th last season. Their combined starting 11 plus manager salary is 2,483,000, which is over 4.5 times the cost of the team that we just made. Again, demonstrating the relative value of these players. In terms of further improvements to the project, it would be great to expand upon this to also include data for the new freely promoted teams such as Leicester City, Ipswich Town and Southampton. Perhaps by looking at the players from these clubs, we could find even more players who are paid a relatively low salary who'd be great in a fantasy league for next season. Another improvement would be to use web scraping to automatically update the database for the 2024-25 season. Currently, the database only contains data for 2023-24. We could use web scraping to make this process entirely automatic so that year on year we just get more and more and more data and can create more and more inferences for the next season. Another improvement would be to include the ability to search for one specific player and then be presented with a summary of their strengths and weaknesses based on their in-game stats. So in the current model, you can look at, say, the top goal scorers and be, oh, I can see this player has scored a lot of goals this season. But it would be good if you could just look for that player, let's say Erling Haaland, and then it says, yep, he's good at scoring because he scored this much. He's good at passing because this much. He's good at this because this much. So that's another improvement that could be made. Final thoughts on the project. Although stats alone do not determine a player's value, it can serve as an indicator of a player's level of production. The interactive worksheets provide a straightforward way to access and filter player data for the 2023-24 season. So there's over 500 players in this database, I believe 520, and you can see from the worksheet demonstration that it's so quick and so easy to filter for exactly what you want, whether that's who's the best passer in the league based on my budget, or even the Euros coming up, who's the best players from a particular nation in the Premier League. By comparing players based on key stats, we can identify players who'd be good value for money and then consider adding these players into our 2024-25 fantasy team. That's the end of the presentation. I just want to say thank you very much for listening, and I hope this top 11 is valuable to you, and I wish you all the best of luck with your Premier League fantasy teams for the next season.